Hey everyone, welcome to the SEGA Saturn podcast, or the SaturnCast, with David.
Hi.
And Kay.
Hello.
And I thought basically we wanted to start a podcast about the Saturn stuff because there wasn't really any stuff for the Saturn. There's all Dreamcast or Genesis or some other topic.
32X.
32X, yeah. That we should have done a 32X cast instead.
That would be awesome.
Do a total of one episode, right?
We're already done.
We're done.
Yeah,
So
that was a good podcast.
Good.
You forgot to introduce yourself.
Yeah, you did.
Oh,
Who are you?
And, I forgot. And I'm Patrick. So
Our venerable host.
Yes. Well, we're all hosts. We're all equal in the eyes of everybody. But yeah, let's start with sort of introductions. Did you want to start, David?
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Dave. I'm from San Diego, California. I grew up in Reno, Nevada, and let's see how did I get into the Saturn? Basically, was lined up in a queue for Mario 64, Christmas of '96, and I was waiting to play this game, and I saw a demo of Nights into Dreams, and it kind of caught my interest and pretty much made me forget all about Mario 64, or at least not want to wait in that long line, for another hour or whatever. And so I was determined to pick myself up a Sega Saturn, at which time was pretty easy to do, since lots of folks were just selling them off for nothing, because it was Christmas '96 and everybody wanted to get a Nintendo 64. So I went into a little game shop right across from my high school. It was called Game Force, and it's still there. And I bought my first Sega Saturn for $40, and the guy threw it into a shopping bag very unceremoniously with a tangled web of controllers and hookups, and gave me a copy of Myst and I believe Daytona USA, and that's how I got my start. My brother and I pretty much teamed up and decided to give this console some love and buy some games for it, and we would just stay up all night playing the Sega Saturn, hooked up to an old Commodore 64 monitor, and it was lots of fun. And that's how I got into the Saturn. And
That's
now,
awesome.
Yeah, now it's kind of just a thing of nostalgia. I would never lie and say that there wasn't a huge degree of nostalgia attached to it, because it does definitely remind me of some of the best years of my teenage youth growing up. Reminds me of my brother. It was definitely our thing. My dad was a musician, and he played the PlayStation. That was kind of his thing, and he let us play it, but the Saturn was definitely ours. So it kind of felt like it was our thing, and we kind of went in a different direction. So nowadays I really enjoy playing the console, because I'm always finding new games for it that or even if they're games that I'm aware of, they're not games that I've spent any kind of significant time with. So, when I pop them in and I go, wow, this console just has the ability to surprise me again and again, even today. So that's my story.
Yeah. And did you get that in '97 or?
Yeah. So it was I was a freshman going into high school the fall of '97.
Please
so
don't date people here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't need to do that. But it would have been 97 that I got that. So and then 98, nothing was happening on the Saturn, but games were super cheap. Did you want me to keep talking, or do you want to move on to somebody else? I mean, I've got more to say, but
I gotcha. Well, just a basic introduction. I think that was pretty good.
Yeah. All I will say, one more thing, is that that copy of Enemy Zero sat on the shelves for it sat on the same shelves of that EB for 6 months while I waited for Christmas to come. And my uncle, I just told him, go to EB, it'll be there. You can find it. Nobody wants it. And he bought it for me. And so that's another little,
Awesome.
Nugget.
It's a solid game.
It is.
All right. Did you wanna go, Kay?
Yeah, what the heck? I wasn't interested in the Saturn at all when it came out. It was way too bloody expensive. And I guess I was a Nintendo fanboy growing up for the most part.
Fair enough.
But what had actually turned me off from Nintendo was the N64. So I grew up in Hawaii, and every day after school, I'd go either to the bowling alley for the arcade, or I'd go down to Pearl Ridge, which is a big, like a mega mall as far as Hawaii is concerned. And there's a Toys R Us right on the outskirts of it, and they'd have all the video game consoles set up on kiosks, and you got to try everything out. And I would spend a lot of time playing, like trying to play Mario 64 or Tekken 2 on the PlayStation. But what I ended up actually playing, the most out of was Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn. It was just really smooth,
Nice.
played really well, and I couldn't stand the idea of 3D Mario. Like Mario gets a mushroom, he gets big, and he gets hit by an enemy, and he gets small and then dies, not having a life bar. It was just really weird to me to see that. So I felt kind of like abandoned, I guess, by Nintendo. It didn't feel right anymore. And this is still, of course, long before like Ocarina of Time or anything else that had come out later on, because I'm a huge Zelda fanboy.
How old were you at this time?
It was
Estimate?
probably like a sophomore in high school.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But one of the things I started getting into in Hawaii were, smack dab between the U.S. and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a very large population of native Japanese and second generation Japanese. So there is a huge market for import in Hawaii, at least in the early to mid 90s. And there was a game store. It wasn't retro at the time, and now it'd be retro. But you could pick up pretty much any import game you'd be interested in, as long as you're playing, willing to pay the cost. And a series caught my eye. I was really into wrestling video games, and the series was Fire Pro Wrestling.
Good game,
So-
good game.
Good game, yeah.
I started getting really into the advent of the internet and horizons expanding, learning about Fire Pro, specifically like Super Fire Pro X Premium, I think it was, and then finding out that Human Entertainment put Fire Pro 6-Man Scramble on the Saturn, and it was the idea of popping in a 6-player adapter and having 6 human players in a wrestling game was fascinating to me. So that started getting me interested in the Saturn. This is a couple of years after launch, obviously. And then what sealed the deal was Virtual On. It was a pretty decent port. It's not the greatest port ever, but it was a pretty decent port, except that we didn't have the sticks. We just had to use at the time, the Boomerang controller.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Definitely not the most fun way to play that game.
No, not at all. So a buddy of mine worked at a Blockbuster Video and told me they were starting to clearance out some consoles and asked me if I wanted a Saturn. And I think he sold it to me with it was actually a PlayStation molded Blockbuster carrying case.
Okay.
And I want to say it was like $30, maybe $40 for that, 2 controllers, the hookups. It didn't come with any games, but the first games I ended up buying were Virtual On, and then I imported Fire Pro Wrestling S 6-Man Scramble. So that's how I got started with the Saturn. I'd say probably within 6 months I modded it to have a region switch because I was getting a lot of Japanese games.
Wow,
at
that's
that
cool
point.
that you had that outlet.
Was the action replays hard to find back then?
No, that was also one of my first purchases, but the thing with the action replay is that at the time, it was like a good $50, $60 device. And
Oh, I see.
yeah, it's not as cheap as it was now, but it was also much better made back in those days.
for sure.
and had more components. You had a little port on the top, looks like a parallel printer port.
So if I have one of those, that means it's an original?
Yeah.
Because it has the little EMS sticker on the back and it says guaranteed. And then I have another one that doesn't. And it still says EMS, but so it's probably a third-party Chinese.
Well, they're all, I think they were all made by EMS, but they ended up redesigning it because that port on the top is for what's called a PC comms link.
Yeah.
And it's an ISA only. Like, if anyone knows PC terminology from like the early 90s, it's an ISA card. You couldn't find it in a PCI version.
No, it's parallel.
It's not even. Well, I mean, it's a parallel
port, but it's
style. Okay. But it's a comms link, like a serial connection.
Mm-hmm.
So, any case, way off the fucker. Those things were expensive back then, and I did a lot of studying, and the region switch on a Saturn is actually really easy to do if you're only going between US and Japan. So, got out a soldering iron.
It's just a trace, right?
Yeah, I mean, you take a single pull double throw switch, I believe it was, and you just drop 3 connections into the 3 region sections to switch between ground and +5. And which format you provided, like US versus Japan, was just alternating of 2 of those resistors, or 2 of those jumpers. So I took a soldering iron. This is my first Saturn story that's horribly, like nightmarish. An old Radio Shack soldering iron that I'm pretty sure I still have somewhere. And I melted a hole in the top of the case because I didn't have a Dremel or a drill or anything of that nature.
That works.
It made a hole, and I, sanded it out with some sandpaper and then attached a round button toggle switch to it.
Sure.
Looked pretty nice at that time if you didn't pull off the button and look underneath at this horrible melted, black mess. But that was my first Saturn that I ended up getting region switched. And then I want to say like 2 months later, I sent it off through Toys and Joys, which was that import store that was near my house. And they actually got it with a mod chip in it. And I still have that mod chip from 1998.
That's sick.
Nice.
And I've been a Saturn fan ever since.
Cool.
That's a really cool story. Yeah, man.
How about you, Patrick?
All right. Well, my name's Patrick. I'm currently in Arizona. I do a mixture of a lot of modding, just a lot of video stuff, video modifications, things like that, RGB stuff. But the funny thing is, I actually never heard of the Saturn until about 2005. I used to live in New Jersey, and by the time I got into a lot of the games and things like that, it was about the Dreamcast was coming out, and I guess maybe it wasn't advertised at all in the East Coast, so I talked to my parents and everybody, and they never heard of the Saturn or really saw anything in the store. So I don't know if maybe they just don't remember, but essentially I just went from Sega Game Gear to Dreamcast, and then from after the Dreamcast died, it was really Nintendo. It was in about 2005. I was in a game store and they had a Saturn. I was like, a Saturn? What's that? And the guy was saying it was the system before the Dreamcast, 32-bit system. And I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. I was like, what? I think it was like 12 or 11 back then.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I didn't really know much about it. So I actually didn't pick it up until a few years later. Funny enough, I picked it up because it had Virtual On it. It was in this little arcade in Arizona. I used to play it all the time with a couple friends, and I never could find it on any other system, but I learned that it was on the Saturn, so I picked it up. Picked up Saturn for $50. That game for about 25, and I've been in love ever since. Been playing fighting games, any amount of games, fighting games, shoot 'em ups mostly. But it's definitely a nice system, a nice piece of tech, even though Most of the games, by the time I got into it, were over $50 to $100. So most of my Saturn library is in Japanese.
I can see though. I can kind of see how, as a kid, you're not the only one that apparently thinks that it was like Genesis to Dreamcast, and like just didn't realize there was this other console in the middle there. Because I've heard other people say that in the early '90s, like in '93, there were so many other like Me Too consoles coming out that you almost kind of got desensitized as a kid. Like if you were like a Super Nintendo kid and you were just like happy with what you had there with all your RPGs and Contra and everything, you know, you'd read magazines and you'd kind of see like the Sega CDX, or you'd see the CDI, or you'd see the XI, you know, like there were so many pieces of hardware coming out that it almost made your head spin. And then there was like I'm drawing a blank, Nintendo Virtual Boy, you know, there was all this filler there, some more successful than other, the 3DO. I can imagine how you might miss the Saturn, you know, with such terrible US marketing.
Oh, very bad.
You know, and then just like a botched launch and everything like that. I can see how you could just be oblivious to it, you know, because there were so many other things vying for your attention back then. And if you didn't have like a ton of money, you just weren't even thinking about it. Instead, you were thinking, how am I going to spend the next, like $40 was a lot of money. You might be like, you know, I'm going to get the next Donkey Kong game or something.
And
because
games weren't cheap back then either.
No, they were the cart-based games were, you know, $60 to $70, you know, at Toys R Us. So it was a big investment, and I can understand how the Saturn passed people up. It would have passed me up as well if I hadn't, you know, because I was going for Nintendo 64, you know, and then it just happened to catch my eye, but I hadn't heard about it till Nights. So that's 96, which means I missed it in 94 and 95.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that
we all missed it in 94 though, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well,
I don't think it came out till
November,
95, right?
In the US?
No, I mean, like, okay, but I was reading game magazines and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah,
I wasn't looking. I was not reading about what was going on in Japan, even though I was interested in like importing on the Super Nintendo side of things. Like, I wasn't really even paying attention at that time, you know, and I wasn't playing my Genesis anymore at that time either, you know, because I was kind of a Nintendo fanboy as well. So anyway, I'm just saying, like, I can kind of see how that happened, and then 2005 is kind of that's when people started collecting for it again, because like you said, prices were starting to go up, you know.
Yeah, man, it's really cool that people are getting into it now, especially with the Japanese library. I mean, the US really got shafted on that library for the most part, but
oh yeah,
I think now that Japan has all these games as well, that's a little bit easier to, you know, get a big library for it, and more games than just, you know, couple ports and half-assed games coming out, right?
It's getting much more difficult. Like, I started getting very serious about my Saturn collection again, probably in 2010, 2011, and made my biggest, you know, pushes towards you know, my collection in, I would say, 2013, 2014 was, you know, like I would say that would be my collecting heyday. And that was about I guess the best example I can give is this currently Panzer Dragoon Saga. Right? Like, everyone knows this game is incredibly expensive right now, right? It's somewhere like the $400 or $500 range on eBay.
Sure.
Probably more than that. In a
No,
couple of years.
4 to 5. Oh yeah, in a couple of years.
In a couple of years, yeah. But just, I'm thinking like right now. Like, I bought that game in 2010 for $125 from a friend of mine at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo.
You probably thought that was a lot.
You know, I've been waiting for it to come down. Like, I had wanted it for years, but I've been waiting for it to come down, and it just wasn't getting lower. And my buddy Danny gave me a good deal on that and another game. I think it was Symphony of the Night. So I picked both of those, you know, relatively heavy hitters, and I paid less than $200 for the pair. But looking in, you know, that was 2010, 2011. You know, moving into, like, you know, 2013, all of the major shmups on the Japanese market, which is what a lot of people go after, right, in Saturn collecting are the shoot 'em ups. They were beginning to be out of price range. Even when I had like a pretty decent job and a lot of expendable cash at the time. I think Hyperduel was a $300 game around then. Now it's like 5 or 6. So just a matter of like.
I've seen it at 7.
Oh God.
I mean, I don't know who paid that, but I've seen it.
Yeah. So what I think is really nice about the Japanese market is that they got a lot of the games that were high priced in the U.S. And they're completely playable, without knowing Japanese. Some of them a lot more so than others. But they were common over there in comparison to the U.S. market having poor marketing, the console pricing itself kind of out of the market from the get-go and never really recovering from that. Not having a massive marketing mascot like Mario or Crash Bandicoot. We ended up seeing
having one and not using it.
Yeah.
Unless you want
I'm sorry, Sonic.
Missing in action.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really sad about what ended up happening, but come 1998, and you're looking at games like House of the Dead. In the U.S., it ended up being like a $50+ game, and I don't think it ever really went down. They had like its clearance time and it was gone, but didn't have a lot of wide release. Yet you can pick it up in Japan for anywhere from like $15 to $20.
Mm-hmm.
So that level of games where you have a lot of really good quality games that are comparable to the ones that we had in the U.S. as far as actually like the title for title.
Sure.
We're looking at the exclusives, and those are going to start to get priced out of a lot of people's range, like we're talking about.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention, just the disparity between Japanese games and U.S. games and the difference in libraries. And it's funny. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Jeremy Parrish from Retronauts and One Up Network. He called the Saturn the lost child of a house divided, and I really think that that's an apt title for it, because it really speaks to the fact that Sega of Japan and Sega of America just could not get along, and the Saturn was really caught in the middle, and it suffered the most from the falling out between those two branches of Sega. And every design choice, from the hardware to the software, they just could not agree, and so it ends up all the way down the line affecting eventually the libraries. And from a collector standpoint, if you're looking at it from the US, it's kind of bleak, but if you're looking at it from the Japan side, then all these options are opened up to you. But it really is a story of two different countries and two different branches of Sega just not being ever able to get on the same page. And
it was ultimately their downfall. I mean,
you
can see it with the Dreamcast though, but I mean, it was a little bit too late by then. I mean, they already had that reputation on them. So I mean, even though
we could do a whole podcast. We could do like a whole podcast or a series of podcasts of what ifs. Like, what if Sega had done this? What if they had done that? I mean, what if the Dreamcast had a DVD drive instead?
Yep, but
instead of a.
What we have is just what happened.
This is true.
I mean,
a lot of that is what makes these consoles kind of unique in the first place. Go ahead, Kay.
There's the U.S. library gets a lot of crap, and
yes.
I almost sometimes feel like it's unfair in a way, because there is actually quite a bit of decent titles. There's just also quite a bit of shovelware and crap. And we look at the Japanese library, and they had a lot of exclusives that were amazing, that really could have been brought over fairly easily.
Sure.
Like Thunder Force, for example, that would have sold like gangbusters over here.
They have a lot of shovelware too, though. Lots of mahjong and lots of gal games. So it's like it's kind of look at the ratio. I'm with you on that. And in fact, in this podcast, I guarantee you two collectively know more about the Japanese market than I do. I mean, admittedly, I've got probably a burned copy of every Japanese game that's worth playing on the console, but I don't know it from an owner's perspective and a collector's perspective like you guys do. But I'm firmly entrenched in, love of the U.S. side of things. And I'm so tired of the cliche that every Saturn podcast or every episode has to trash on the U.S. library and say, well, if all you ever know is the U.S. library, then it's a piece of shit. And, but once, you get on the Japanese side of things, then, it's great. That's not true at all. Like, I was completely happy, completely satisfied with a lot of the games that we got. And sure, sure, I would be holding out for different games, like Wild Arms or Heart of Darkness that we never got, that never saw the light of day. And we never got Tomb Raider 2, and we never got Resident Evil 2, and and then there were even some Japanese imports that we could have gotten that we didn't get because Bernie Solar didn't want to invest in the well, it's not all his fault, but he did not want to invest in the localizing because that's really expensive, and a lot of those RPG titles are incredibly wordy. So he was just thinking in terms of business, a spreadsheet. And I can see how it made sense, dollars and cents, but from a fan's perspective, it was crushing,
Very much so.
I just think, personally, in my opinion, I'm kind of in the middle about that. Well, I do think the U.S. library is definitely not anywhere close to the Japanese library.
Sure.
And I don't think it's like the worst thing, but I mean, it's definitely like if the U.S. Saturn was 4 out of 10, the Japanese Saturn would be 9 out of 10. In terms of that, there's a lot of good stuff that came out, and there's a lot of there's a lot of really good games that came out in the U.S., but just the proportion compared to what came out in Japan and what came out in the U.S. it really wasn't a contest, to be honest. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of hentai and mahjong games and all shovelware in Japan, but
there was a lot of great games too. I mean, Grandia is one of the. Oh my God, if I could just get Grandia in English on the Saturn. Nobody wants to do that.
I don't think anyone's saying that the Japanese library had, crap in it. I mean, there was crap in it, yes, but I think what really is coming out of this, I'm pretty sure that with all of us being Saturn fanboys, we can easily name off 10 games or more out of the U.S. library that are actually damn good. One of the problems is going to be is that those same titles probably came out in Japan as well.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole heck of a lot of U.S. exclusives on the Saturn that make it a single game that you have to buy this system for, only in the U.S. kind of a thing. But if we were to compare not the Japanese Saturn library to the U.S. library, but the U.S. Saturn library to like the U.S. N64 library,
no contest for me.
For me either. I can find barely 10 games that I actually want to own on an N64.
Very true.
I mean,
I've got an EverDrive.
Yeah.
I've got an EverDrive crammed with every game on there, and I find it hard just to find a game to select to play that I'm like even mildly interested in at this point, because most of those games just have not aged well. Mario 64 being one of the few exceptions.
I really just
I just hate that game.
That's fine. No, I mean that's fine. Go ahead.
I just think it really boils down at the end of the day to not what library is better, but just the sign of the times for 3D games and the first 3D games that are released. Because I mean, I think that's the main culprit for it. I mean, because if you think about it, how many 3D games on the Saturn do you want to play right now compared to all the really great 2D games that you'd want to play for it? And the same thing with the N64. They actually had 2D games, but
I don't know. There's, just like pixel art saw kind of a reemergence and several years ago, and there, with new comics and new indie games being developed, I kind of think that early 3D, that kind of early like janky 3D, is coming back in some way. At least like the art where it's the art of limitation, basically. The art of like trying to make something amazing out of like so many limitations. And And I think that I like quite a bit of Saturn 3D games. I mean, I think it's like 50-50 for me. I love all the 2D games, and then I like a lot of the 3D games too. That's just me.
But if it came down to the worst 2D game versus the worst 3D game, would you pick the 3D game or the 2D one?
Ooh, no, yeah, probably the worst. Probably
That's
the worst
a really
2D game.
Would you like to shoot yourself in the head with a Beretta or a Glock, right?
Yeah.
I guess so, but when it comes down to it, I personally would rather play a bad 2D game than a bad 3D game.
Because the worst 2D game would probably control better. You know?
Exactly, and it would be less. It'd be for the most part a little bit less clunky.
Hypothetically speaking.
Yeah, but I mean,
So I
maybe
don't
we
know
can
what
do that
games
one
we're
day.
talking about.
We'll
Yeah.
do a shit showdown. See.
Write it down so that we remember.
Worst Saturn games of all time. But
Head to head.
I really think the main point of the comment that I was trying to make there is that the U.S. library gets crapped on, and none of
So
us
much.
are in the European realm. So I can only imagine how bad their library gets crapped on, right? Because not only do they have the problem of having minimal English localization, but they also have the added problem of playing most of these or a lot of these games in 50 kilohertz. So it's slower, like was like 10% slower than
True.
the NTSC library.
I actually think
So-
they fixed that. Didn't they fix that on the Saturn by that time though?
No.
Oh.
Well, some games would be optimized, but towards the end there, Sega was not taking any time or money on optimizing them.
You can mod the system to overcome that issue.
For sure. And a
the
lot of
5060.
PAL users just buy a Japanese console. They're doing
Mhm.
what everybody else is doing. They're aware of the issue, and they don't have that issue today with modern game consoles, so they'll just buy a Japanese console and go NTSC.
And a step-down converter.
Yeah, with a step-down converter, or I guess you would. Yeah, you'd have to have a step-down transformer for that.
Yeah.
I
So
think it's like 160 or no 200, right?
220.
220
Two-
down
240.
to 120.
Yeah.
240.
Down to
Yeah.
120.
Yeah.
You'd definitely want to step down. Yeah, there's a lot of debate on the Japanese versus U.S. step down, but when it comes to Europe and anywhere,
Yeah.
you'd want to step.
It just
you'd want to
there are
step down.
tolerances. There are tolerances, but we can get into that in a later podcast.
Yeah.
Well,
I have my Neo Geo CDZ plugged into the wall, it's plugged into a power conditioner, but not much more than that, So
I gotcha. Well, speaking of the U.S. Japanese library and expensive games, why don't we get into our main topic for this podcast? Our top 5 recommended Saturn games for new collectors.
You should
Sure.
start this one.
I gotcha.
Patrick, you should start this.
I gotcha.
yeah, you.
I got you. Well, one of the things we discussed on here is that it for a new collector it might be a little bit hard to get into the Saturn, seeing that every game that you'd be interested on eBay is probably in the $100, $80 to $100 range or higher potentially. I mean, a lot of the common ones, like Die Hard Arcade or even Street Fighter Alpha 2, those ones command pretty high prices, even though they're seen as common. But I guess I'll also start off. I really just want to talk about games that if you're a new collector, you go to a game store or maybe a convention and you see a Saturn. Just 5 games that you'd want to pick up and maybe buy once you're there to get a good feel of the console and not break the bank. So I also go first, and we sort of alternate between games. One of the ones that I thought was a good suggestion and pretty much everyone seemed to go with was Nights into Dreams. It's a fun little.
It's a must-own, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's I guess if you don't know what that is, it's basically your. Are you sleeping or something, or? It's basically your character sleeping, and you go into this dream realm with this knight-looking guy, and you go through hoops.
Yeah, and you what's the word? You meld or become one with knights, and it's a score attack game. It's basically like a racing score attack game. I hate it that people call it a platformer, and I guess they do that because when you start out for 1 second you're like walking, on on like a 3D plane as Elliot or Claire, so people think that it's a platformer, but it's really like its own thing. But it's like it's the gameplay can get pretty deep in so much as like just building on your score and just doing better and better. It can get addictive, and it's really fun, but it is definitely unique, and it comes from that time in the mid 90s when Sega was putting out a lot of arcade games that were like based on score attack, you know.
And it's a really neat game. I think it's really unique for just any console because
It really
especially
is.
the Sonic team, because it's not like a 2D side scroller. It's really ballsy that they went with that instead of making a Sonic game for the Saturn, because I think it really shows the true colors of the Saturn, the power, the enjoyment, and especially if you're in the music, the sound chip on the thing.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it really
The
showed off
programming. The programming was just brilliant. It was Yuji Naka and Sonic Team, and I'm just, I think that after 3 Sonic games, they were just kind of tired of it, and they just kind of went off in their own direction. And by that time, he was kind of God, so Sega just let him do it,
Thank goodness for this.
Thank goodness for that. Although at the same time, that resulted in them turning over Sonic Extreme to America, which was a terrible idea. But I understand, by that time why he would be just kind of burnt out on Sonic and wouldn't want to do that. He had this thing kind of in his pocket for a while, and he was just mulling it over. So he was just itching to make this game, and I'm really glad that he did.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I'm involved with up here in the Northwest is Cowlitz Gamers for Kids, and I run the tournament that happens here each year. And this year's tournament, we really wanted to showcase the Saturn, because in previous years we've done, like Smash Brothers or Street Fighter, whatever.
Cool.
But we actually did Nights into Dreams as we had it demoed, and our actual tournament was for Christmas nights. And if nothing else, I mean, not only is this unique to the Saturn, I don't think there's a single other game out there that comes even close to this genre. Right? And can you think of anything that's even remotely close to it?
Not even.
Yeah.
Not really.
Nope.
I mean, it's like, I mean, it's 2.5D, so a lot of the times visually I go back to like Pandemonium, how that kind of had that kind of like 2.5D, and like Klonoa, but those are definitely platformers. You can move it, you can really move it like the slowest pace you want, you can time your jumps and everything. With Knights, it's just really about getting those orbs and making as many loops as many rounds as you possibly can, and just building up your multipliers. And then when you do get the special, when you do like the gymnastics thing, you just like are tapping on that right shoulder button while you're like close to the ceiling or the floor to boost your multipliers, or you can just you can actually do tricks the way that it was intended. But I know that people have found ways to just speed run that and build up their multipliers. But it's impossible for me to really compare this game to anything else. And it's funny that at the time everybody just compared it to Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot, because it was like the only thing Sega had that was a mascot character, so it kind of became the face of the system, whether that's what Yuji Naka wanted or not.
Yeah, I am definitely a big fan of this game. And I'm going to segue into one of my choices, because I actually have Christmas Nights into Dreams as like my option, or one of my options for this. And the reason being, like, Nights into Dreams came in a couple of different packages in the US with and without the 3D controller, which, I would say that the definitive experience is with the 3D controller, but it is playable without it.
For sure.
So, Christmas Nights was a demo that was given away for free in some magazines, and David, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these facts, it was given away as a demo in both the US and in Europe, and it was presented as a demo, and I think included with a couple of pack-ins.
I believe you could buy it at Blockbuster for a discounted cost if you rented another. Well, I mean, yeah, it was kind of one of those things where it was up at the front at a kiosk, and they were giving them away at Block. It was either given away or you could buy it for like $1 or something like that with a rental of the Saturn, or with a video game rental. And I'm not sure it ever got. Oh, it was also given away at some video game stores, but I don't remember if it was EB or what. But you're right about the magazine, free magazine giveaway. So and the Brits, they could buy it at Game as well. If they missed the magazine, they could get it at Game.
So the reason why I'm putting this on this list is that the US version, especially around Christmas time, the price spikes. And I have been watching it because we did this tournament. We tried to get legitimate copies for everybody for the tournament. And it normally goes somewhere between $40 and $60, but around Christmas time it starts to spike. And it's in a way disappointing because it's a demo, right? But
DLC.
The reason... Yeah.
Yeah.
But the reason why this game is amazing, and I actually put this above Knights itself. This is not to take away anything from Knights, but it was so packed, full of surprises, full of Easter eggs. It made really innovative use of the clock functionality on the Saturn. If you have the date turned to certain dates, like Christmas Eve, New Year's, Valentine's Day, you will see different effects happen in your game. You know, the environment changes. Most of the time, it's just like a demo version of Knights. You know, anywhere I think from like March until November, it's just Knights. But you know, rolling around into the winter seasons, the holiday seasons, you'll start to see snowfall and becomes Christmas Nights on Christmas Eve, and Happy New Year Nights on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Snow will fall during those time periods, or you'll have hearts falling during Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
it was phenomenal what they did with this, and it was a demo, and they just gave it away to us.
Yeah.
So in Japan,
and you forgot about Sonic into Dreams too.
Oh yeah, Sonic into Dream is in there as well.
Yeah.
I want to leave some secrets, right?
Oh, too okay. Spoiler.
So is the Japanese and the English one any different from each other, or is it essentially the same game? Even
I think it's the same thing.
Same thing. I think the voiceovers were done in Japanese, and that's really about it. But the gameplay doesn't change. And let's be honest, this game wasn't really about story. It's about score attack.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not missing much if you don't see that intro video. And honestly, if you want to see,
you're missing all the bosses, though. You're missing all the boss battles.
You're missing all the boss playing.
You're missing the Wise Man, and you're missing Twin Seeds, and I think I would argue that both. It's 50-50 for me. I definitely think there's enough content in Christmas Nights to set it aside as its own game. I don't even consider it. I consider it a must-own, full-fledged, experience with plenty of stuff. And it really should have. If only they could have released everything on one disc, right? But
exactly.
Yeah, but I do think they both stand alone for sure. But they really showed you what you could do with the A-Life system and the music, and with Christmas Nights.
So the main thing is that we're in Japan. Christmas Nights is like a $15 game, and it's common. You can find it anywhere, so you can still experience all of this bonus content. It definitely is like for me personally, I put it above Knights, and I'm a Knights fan. Have you ever seen that 3D lenticular poster for Knights?
Oh yeah.
So I've got one of those two of them in a light box. So it's like my Knights sign. I love this game. I even imported like the Korean version of the handheld Knights, still sealed.
Nice.
So I am a Knights fan. I like Christmas Nights better because of the content and all the extra bonuses that you can do.
The cool thing is the Japanese one actually, I think it has a nicer packaging compared to the US one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But both of them definitely must-owns for the system.
So were you like a member of the Nights into Dreams forum with DigiValentine back in the day? No? Just a big Knights fan? Okay.
Yeah, just a big Knights fan.
Cool.
Didn't even know that existed. Well, Guess I know what I'm joining after this podcast is over.
Yeah, go listen to the Dreamcast. There's actually a podcast called the Dreamcast.
Yeah,
Of course
It's
there
like
is.
it's him and his girlfriend, maybe somebody else. I don't know, but it was pretty cool.
DreamPod's pretty good too.
Oh, DreamPod, yeah, for sure. Okay, off topic.
All right, so did you want to go into your selection, Dave?
So you just want me to list one game? Because kind of how I did this, I mean, I don't mind going last, but I kind of did this as like a shopping list. Like if you had $200 and you really wanted to get into the Saturn, this is what I recommend that you do. Do you want me to just list off one game, or do you want
we
me
were
to
just going in
wait
line for just one game each, so that
Okay.
way you can just give our different views and information for it, so we're not just shotgunning it.
Sure. Let's talk about Panzer Dragoon, the original. I think that I'm going to call this one, if you're starting out. I definitely think that Zwei is a better game, but I think that Panzer Dragoon is an amazing launch title, and I think that it does still stand up. I think that it's a fun on-rails shooter, and I think that it's worth owning, and it's affordable enough, that it's not going to break the bank, if you're just starting out with Saturn. What do you guys think?
I think that's an excellent choice. I played it before. It's a pretty fun game, and definitely really shows off a lot of what they could and couldn't do with the Saturn. In ways.
For sure. I mean, if you hook it up to a good stereo system too, just the soundtrack is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, all the I know it's going to sound like repetitive, but the soundtrack was excellent, and I think Sega really knew how to take control of that sound chip. I mean, from all their games, Daytona USA, Sega Rally, Knights, Panzer Dragoon, all the games sounded excellent. Excellent sound design, excellent soundtracks.
The cool thing with Panzer Dragoon too is that, or with Panzer Dragoon as well, is that its soundtrack was fully orchestral. So it was CD Red Book audio, but it was just and I agree with you. I really do love quite a few of the games that utilize the actual sound hardware of the Saturn, because I do think that it had a good sound library. But I do just love the Panzer Dragoon soundtrack. And it's out on vinyl from Data Discs, and it's just worth listening for sure.
Definitely, just get a pair of headphones, close your eyes, turn off all the lights, and go into a world of dragons. Well, I mean, not like Game of Thrones, but
I'm mixed on this one. Everything that that one didn't quite accomplish, Zwei, Panzer Dragoon 2 got. And the price difference, even though all the prices are going up, it's
over
reasonable.
50. It's over 50, and I thought we set that as our limit. I mean, you could get a disc only. Are we talking disc only here?
Well, my friend just picked up for about $35, like at a game store recently.
Panzer Dragoon 2, complete.
Oh, 2. I thought you meant 1.
No, yeah, 1. I do mean 1, but he's talking about 2.
Yeah.
I would recommend 2 over 1 any day, if money is no object, And I would also recommend that you pick up I would recommend that you pick it up complete with the manual. There's a lot of information in there that just isn't explained to you in the game, about how the branching paths and stuff like that.
I think you get a Japanese copy for cheap too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. You can definitely save a lot of money just going exclusively Japanese on a lot of these games, and it's not really, they're already speaking gibberish anyway. So I mean, there is some plot. There definitely is some storytelling. And that's done in subs, but if you really don't care about the story and you can kind of glean what's going on just from the visuals, then I'd say go for it.
I played a lot of Panzer Dragoon 1 at that Toys R Us when they swapped it out for the Virtua Fighter, and it is definitely an experience. The audio, like you guys mentioned, just phenomenal.
But as a starting collector, I also recommend it because I don't think you should ever go backwards. I think that if you're experiencing it, you'll appreciate it for what it is, and then when you get Zwei, you'll appreciate that just as much more, just like we did. versus if you open up with Vi, you might get the original as a collector, but you're never going to want to play.
Yeah, I think this is a solid choice. Me personally, if I had picked between 1 and 2, I would probably have
into this
gone.
console.
Yeah, I'd probably do 2 as well, but 1 is you're gonna have just a good time with 1 as you are with 2. So even if it's like you have to pick one, I definitely would get 1 just to experience that, and like he said, just get 2 a little bit later on. But
yeah, if you have to pick 1, yeah, then go with 2 probably.
Did you play the port or whatever it was on the Xbox or the PS2? Well, Orta.
Oh, you're talking about the Sega Ages port.
Well, there was a Sega Ages port on PS2, but Orta had like an unlockable to play the Saturn version of Panzer Dragoon.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
And that was a port of the PC version, which I've played the PC version, the Sega PC version, but I haven't played that unlockable version, and I've only played a little bit of Orta, so I can't speak to that.
Solid choice.
Yeah. Well, I guess another one that I decided to go with as well was the Japanese version of Die Hard Arcade, or Dynamite Deca if you live in Japan. But I went with the Japanese version because it's definitely a lot cheaper. I think I paid $8 to $12 for it when I got it in the Japanese version, and essentially it's just like the US version, like 1 for 1 besides a couple of Japanese text here and there, but all the commands for buttons are, jump, attack, kick, punch. I think the only thing that there are little subtitles on the side, but the same thing with House of the Dead, but that's a different game. But if you don't know
Oh, go ahead.
If you don't really know about Die Hard Arcade, is essentially a beat 'em up really a beat 'em up that came out in the arcades, and it's sort of loosely based off of the Die Hard license, where you're in a tower and you have to fight people. But after those two, it sort of branches off. The story is like you're 2 cops, well, if you're multiplayer, and you have to rescue the president's daughter from these terrorists and try to save the tower and save the president's daughter. And it's a really fun game. The ending is kind of really weird, but I think it's weird if you play 2 players. It's fine if you're 1 player, but
it is weird.
It's really
and I'm
strange.
not going to spoil it.
Yeah, you gotta play it, but that ending is really strange.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely my choice. It's extremely cheap. It's really fun, and really, I've never gotten bored with it. I played it like 25 times, and it's still a fun beat 'em up, and is hilarious. Especially
was that one of the first games that used QuickTime events?
From what I know, maybe.
Like I was never familiar with QuickTime events before that game came out in the arcade. So that was like a novel idea to me. And I thought it was really cool. And then it was something that Sega ended up doing a lot.
Yeah, but what were you? Did you guys play a lot of Die Hard Arcade when you had the Saturn, or when you first got into it?
Oh yeah, I mean I played it on the STV in the arcades, and then it came. It was arcade first, right? Yeah, and then it came home, and I had a copy of it, and I played it with my brother quite a bit. So yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I did not get it until actually after Dynamite Cop on the Dreamcast came out. That was kind of what got my interest into it. It was Dynamite Cop, right? That was the sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I actually had no experience with that game until like 2002, 2003. What I did play a lot of was the Die Hard trilogy, which is nowhere near as good.
Yeah.
So, nowhere near as good.
Yeah, my favorite thing about it was just giving my brother a hard time with the friendly fire,
You just punch him while the thing's ending or whatever.
Or just shoot him. We'd be working together and shoot him with the bazooka.
That's fun.
Be like, what the fuck?
Nice.
Yeah, because that was more fun than shooting the NPCs.
I do the same thing in Streets of Rage. I'll just go up to him, like stab him with a knife, or just kick him over.
Yeah.
but that's Streets of
Awesome.
Rage stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a really good game if you want to really get a really good beat 'em up for the Saturn library, and it's pretty cheap too in Japan. I think it's like 50 to 80 in America, but still, you can't go wrong with it. Even if you paid that much for it, I definitely could. I could see myself playing that like multiple times over and over again.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it was that expensive in America.
Yeah, it became popular.
But I mean, I thought it could be had for like 60. I feel like I've seen it for 60.
Probably, and the prices might even change by the time anyone's listening to this. But yeah, that's basically my
Cool.
choice.
That's a solid choice.
What about UK?
I put in Assault Suit Lenos 2.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's how'd you describe this? Kind of like a platforming shooter. It's a sequel to a Genesis game that I never owned, so I always forget what it was.
No, this is Japanese only, right?
It is Japanese only, yeah.
But it's an affordable game, though.
It is. I mean, shoot 'em ups or shooters in general. Doesn't matter whether it's like a standard shoot 'em up or any other type of
Command a price.
Yeah, they do command prices, but there are still some out there, even in Japan, that are under $50. I think I see this pretty steadily around the $30 to $40 mark, and it's actually a great game. Trying to remember what the game it was. Target Earth. It was the sequel to Target Earth, and I think that the Assault Suit series was also on the Super Nintendo at some point too, right? Anyone remember?
Yeah. In Japan.
So, didn't it come out? Well, it's a Saturn podcast, so
Yeah.
no, who cares about the Super Nintendo? But
Yeah, I actually never played the Assault Suit. What exactly is it about?
You're a mech. It's a 2D shooting platformer, and it's brilliant. I mean, I don't know how else to really explain it. For being like a sleeper hit on the Genesis with Target Earth, this is also kind of like a in the know Saturn game. The gameplay is really excellent for such
what would you compare it to for Patrick? Like, would you? It's not quite like Bangai-O. It's not like as frantic, but it's
not like
on a 2D plane, but you're like using your boosters and you're just all over the place.
There's a lot of stuff going on at all times. I was almost going to go to Bangai-O for kind of
reference. I mean, but that's like anti-gravity. You're just all over the place. But I just remember all I can really say about this game is that the controls are just so tight. It's one of those games that if you're not into mech games, you might be turned off to it just because of like the muted color palette and the fact that it's you're a mech, but it's not like any of those other mech games that you might have played. It's just so fast and tight and fluid. Like, that's all I can say is it really is fun to play, and you don't want to put the controller down.
It's going to end up becoming one of those games that people will start to discover because it was Japanese exclusive. That we're gonna make it the next Radiant Silvergun right here.
$200 game confirmed. Buy it now.
Buy it now. Yeah. Right. Hold up stock. I don't know. I was a latecomer to this one as well, but it had been on my list for years and years and years. And this is one that I've not seen anyone who's played this game, like actually played this game, not like it. And it was Cybernator on the Super Nintendo.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Nice.
Cybernator. That is really the perfect example. Although there's like with Cybernator, there's like multiple levels. Like there's a lot of verticality to that game, but it is probably the closest comparison that you could draw.
They're all from the same source material, right? They're all Assault Suits. That one was Assault Suits Vulcan.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And then Konami
that was
released
just
it.
the common name here.
Yeah, a Cybernator here. But in any case, I love every time I play this game. I don't play it for very long, unfortunately, with the 4-year-old, but it is tight controls. I thought decent level design and lots of fun. And I don't know if you talked about muted palettes. It's amazing. It's just amazing. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now.
Cool. All right.
Is it my turn again?
Yeah. We have after you, David, we'll do one more, and then we're about like in the hour mark. So I'll stretch it down. So we'll do one more.
I changed my choice, but this is going to allow me to talk about 2 games in one.
Cool.
Because when we started out this podcast, we were talking about 2D games versus 3D games. Okay, and this is my choice. Layer Section 2.
That's nice.
I absolutely love this game. It's a 3D shmup. I mean, it is 2D, but it's using 3D polygonal graphics. It is the successor to Galactic Attack or Layer Section. And what was it in PAL territories? I can't remember right now. It's not coming. Anyway, so Galactic Attack was brilliant. And I love Galactic Attack, and it is a 2D vertical shooter that takes place on many levels. So you have it was gun lock originally, and then you have like this gun that you can lock on to enemy craft that are like several layers below you, and so it's got this really cool mechanic, and it's got it's just got a bit more depth than your typical shooter. So that's a really great game, but I really want to push Layer Section 2 because I do think that it's a brilliant game that utilizes 3D visuals, and it's got really tight controls. The graphics are beautiful. The color is just, I feel like it's just perfect, and it's a shooter that you can actually afford on the Saturn. It is Japan only for Layer Section 2, but I do think that it's one that I want to recommend.
Nice.
For those looking for the European, it was Gunlock.
Oh, it was Gunlock.
And it was originally Ray Force.
Ray Force, and that's what it was released on the PS1 as, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Ray Force.
Great choice.
That's on my list, though, to get for shmups next. I gotta...
Yeah, I feel like it's just going to keep going up. But it's just one of those ones that I've compared it. I've done a comparison Saturn versus PS1, and it's funny because the PS1 does kind of render 3D graphics a little smoother due to its like the filtering that it has, the hardware filtering that the PlayStation has, and the ability to map textures onto several vertices, at the same time, whereas the Saturn does that weird thing where it like splits everything. It splits textures up into individual sprites. But there is something about the Saturn version on a CRT that just looks better to me. So I'm going to say that I prefer the Saturn version.
Very nice.
Nice.
And the side note to that being that Galactic Attack for a US game is still not crazy priced.
For sure. That's what I was going to mention as well. I get to talk about the games because I think they're both must-owns for the console.
What is the average price for sort of a Layer Section?
I think $40 for both of them. That's off the top of my head.
Is it a 2-for-1 sort of deal where you get both the games with one game, or?
I think you can get it. Okay, I'm sorry. I think you can get a complete in-box domestic copy of Galactic Attack for $40 if you're patient. If you're not patient or you're not willing to hunt around, you're probably going to pay like $45 or $50. Layer Section 2, I think, is also about $40 complete in box shipped from Japan.
So the US got the first one, but we didn't get Layer Section 2.
Yeah, we got the first one, which is a brilliant game. And if all you can do is play the domestic one, you're not doing too bad. But I still prefer Layer Section 2 over the original. So
you would say if somebody had a choice at like a game con, it was Layer Section 1 and 2, you'd
Layer Section 2. I would. 2. What do you think, Kay? Big in Japanese games.
I am big in Japanese games. Similar, a lot of these games got better with the sequels. They took the same formulas and they just made them better. So
it's like Assault Suit Lenos 2, I mean, I think it's the same thing.
I guess the real trick to this is making sure that you know how to play imports on whatever Saturn you end up getting, right? 'Cause that might be a stumbling block for some people. But
Sure.
with shmups, and I think we talked about possibly doing this in future episodes where we talk about imports that are no Japanese required or minimal Japanese language required, so English speakers natively can play a lot of these games. This is going to be one of them. You can't go wrong with this game.
And when you see that first boss battle, it's like the fluidity of the motion. They just got it right with this game. Like, and this is one of those games I feel like it usually stays locked at like close to 60 frames per second. So when you see it, you just say, whoever said that the Saturn can't do 3D is just full of shit, because it really is it's a visual showpiece for the console, I think.
Yeah, I would have to agree. And I'm looking right now on eBay as you speaking about it. US Galactic Attack has some buy it nows in the $40 to $50 range, and Layer Section 2 has at least a couple of buy it nows that are under 50, right about 60 if you count shipping. So don't wait on these games. If you are a collector of the actual original software disc, the manuals, you want that whole package. These are not going to last much longer at these prices. They're already like 20-30% higher than they were a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Just imagine you like the QVC network, and it's like flashing the game on the screen. This deal won't last forever. If you miss it now, you're gonna die. So
and
get
if you're exclusively disc only, you still should get it now, because it's going to be a lot cheaper, and there's really no reason to wait, because even the disc only is going to go up as the complete goes up. So
yeah.
if you're just interested in playing the game, then it's probably like $20.
Yeah, it's about there.
Sounds good. So let's move on to our final choices. So one of the things I had a hard time to do is sort of narrow down the last choice, and I think I found a good medium. I decided to go with the King of Fighters 97, which is actually the last game that came out, the last King of Fighters game that came out on the Sega Saturn before the move to 98 on the Dreamcast and the Neo Geo if you have millions of dollars. But
how much is this game?
The US copy, I got it for fairly cheap. I think I got it for under $20 for KOF 97. And the cool thing about it is
there's a US copy of KOF 97.
Sorry, did I say US copy?
Yeah,
I meant
I was about to quit the podcast and
buy it immediately, just drive down.
I was just like, what? How could I have missed this?
But I decided to go with King of Fighters 97, the last game on the Dreamcast. I decided to go with King of Fighters 97, the last King of Fighters game on the Sega Saturn. Mostly because it's actually one of the King of Fighters that doesn't require a cartridge to play, especially if you're importing.
Okay, so how much does it cost again?
It's only about 25 to 30 for a copy of it.
Okay, because I was gonna have you make the argument of why they should choose this over Street Fighter Alpha 2.
I see. Yeah. Personally, it's just my personal opinion. I think that KOF 97 had a lot more fun than Street Fighter Alpha 2.
Sure.
It's more of a simplified fighter compared to the other one. It's a 4-button Neo Geo game.
Right.
It's nice and fast paced. It has the cool thing, you can play singles or a 3-man tournament if you guys are familiar with King of Fighters.
Absolutely.
Style. But it's a neat little fighting game. You have to participate in this tournament, and you want to become a winner with either on a singles or a triple team where you can select 3 different characters. And
was this your favorite King of Fighters game? I'm just curious.
Personally, I think it's one of my favorites. I think I'm stuck between 98 and 97.
That's what I hear people say all the time. 97 is the best. And other people say like 98 or 99. But I've heard a lot of people say 97 is the best in the series.
Yeah, it sort of came out right before the peak, where 98 would have hit that peak, and it sort of started going downhill a bit. Right. Especially when SNK got bought out by Playmore.
Yes.
And became SNK Playmore. Some of the games were rushed and were really not the best King of Fighters, but I just think it's a really fun fighting game, and if you need one fighting game and you really want that mixture of singles, triples, and all these different modes, I think it probably is one of the best versions, and especially if you're a King of Fighters fan.
And I think that price is lower than some of the Capcom fighters, so
Yeah,
I think that's a solid recommendation.
Yeah,
there's a buy it now right this moment. Buy it now for $24.99 plus $10 in shipping.
That's a good deal.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, have you guys played any of the King of Fighters or any SNK fans at all?
I don't own a copy of it. You're making me think about it. I have a copy. I have played quite a bit of King of Fighters. I have 97 on my CDC, and once it takes a little while to load, but once it's loaded up, it's pretty much you're good to go. And you're right, it is really fast and responsive, and it controls well. I do think it's one of the best in the series. I really like King of Fighters 95 for nostalgic purposes, but I do think 97 was much of an improvement with the backgrounds and just the character animation, because I do think that they improved on the sprites from 95 to 97.
Yeah, and the Saturn is really just great for 2D fighters. I mean, to be
really
honest, I usually tell people if they want to get into SNK, they should get a Saturn, because there's a ton of SNK games that are released for the Saturn, and most
there are a
of
lot
them
of fighters that don't require the RAM carts.
exactly. I think maybe only 95 and 96 do.
95 requires a ROM cart, so if you have the game without the cart, you're SOL.
You can't play it, yeah.
You can't play it at all. But interesting tidbit, it did come out in the PAL territory, so there is an English version of King of Fighters 95 for the Saturn available.
So it's completely playable.
Yeah, not that you need English to play it, but from a collector's standpoint, it's interesting. And then 96 did require the 1 meg RAM cart.
Okay.
Specifically the 1 meg though, because if you have the 4, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That PAL version would suffer from the 50 hertz refresh, right? So everything.
My copy is on the way. I actually just bought one 2-3 days ago, so I've actually shied away from touching most of the PAL stuff. I don't know if it's been PAL optimized or not. I didn't look into it. I was just excited to find one.
Cool.
Yeah, but if you guys need a fighting game to kill some time and just want to get a feel of it, definitely go with 97. I think it's one of my favorites, and I think it's all of our favorites for the most part. I don't know about Kay. I know David likes it at least.
Well, he would probably say Virtua Fighter 2, since he spent so much time on that game. All right?
So,
unless we're talking 2D fighters exclusively.
Yeah, but what about you? What about you, Kay? What was your final number 3?
And this list was really hard to whittle down. I'm sure you guys can see the for bang for buck. I want to throw out an honorable mention, and that is the 3-pack. They're common games, right? It's Daytona USA, it's Virtual Cop, it's Virtual Fighter, and quite frankly, without a gun, you can't do anything fun with Virtual Cop. Without a CRT, you can't do anything fun with Virtual Cop. It's still a solid game. Virtual Fighter 2 is a very solid fighter. It's dated, yeah, but it plays so smoothly. And Daytona USA is just fun. You can have that 3-pack or the 3 games that are in that pack for really cheap. So it's not something to be missed, despite the fact that it's cheap. That said, I was a Capcom fighter fan, not a SNK fighter fan. And so my picks, because you can still find them, under $50, are going to be pretty much any of the Capcom fighters that you can find at that range. So Pocket Fighter is really fun if you like chibi characters. I play a lot of X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel vs. Street Fighter. You can't really go wrong with any of them.
I agree with that.
So, and I was looking at prices this morning on Pocket Fighter, and it's still somewhere between the $30 and $40 range on a lot of auctions. It's still getting up there, but it is one that you can have for fairly cheap. I'm shocked at the fact that X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Marvel versus Street Fighter, which I got in like 97, 98. I don't remember exactly when. But they're still about the same prices as what I paid, back at that point in time. So, get these kind of games if you're into fighters. If you like the Capcom stuff, they do require, Pocket Fighter doesn't, but X-Men Versus and Marvel Superheroes Versus does require the 4 meg RAM card, or you can get away with using like the Action Replay 4-in-1.
Yeah, I personally been playing X-Men vs Street Fighter. Actually, funny enough, I was playing it last night, but it's probably one of my favorite in the Marvel Versus series, just because I love the soundtrack, and I think it's really fast paced and easy to get used to.
Yeah, it's a lot faster than Children of the Atom or Marvel superheroes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I loved all of the Capcom fighters on this system. So, if I were to gush, right, like the crowning jewel for the Saturn, Street Fighter 03.
Yeah, Street Fighter 03. Yeah.
It is phenomenal. That game is packed with so much extra content. In comparison to pretty much any other version. It's not arcade perfect, so people are looking for that. They're going to be a little disappointed, but
just barely though, by so little.
So little.
It's just that quality. The sound quality is just not there compared to the other versions.
There was a couple other things. I think timing. It's been a long time, but I was reading in the SRK forums that in comparison, if you wanted to get arcade perfect, then the only option you had was to either get the arcade board or pick up like the Alpha Collection on PS2.
What about the Dreamcast one?
The Dreamcast is was it upper? So it's not the same game as what was like most people experience in the US arcades.
Really? I never knew that.
Yeah, the Dreamcast. I don't think the Dreamcast version I don't think the Dreamcast version's animation was as good as the Saturn one. I mean, I compared them side by side, and I was kind of disappointed with the Dreamcast version. Plus, you have to, if you're using a D-pad, that's not even an option. You have to go with a fight stick.
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
So, not to have talked about like 5 different games or 8 different games in that section, but if you're going to go into Capcom fighters and money is of no object, or you just don't care and you're willing to burn a game, Street Fighter 03. If you want to collect the legitimate copies of the disc, Pocket Fighter is actually really fun. X-Men vs Street Fighter and Marvel Superheroes vs Street Fighter are both great ports. You even get an extra character out of Marvel Superheroes that you didn't have in the US. So those are kind of like the picks that I have for fighters.
That's pretty solid. I definitely agree with you on the Street Fighter Alpha 3 or 03.
Absolutely.
I definitely think it's one of my favorite Marvel fighters on that console. That or X-Men vs Street Fighter. X-Men vs Street Fighter was right now.
Yeah, I think that's a game that you should play on any. If the Dreamcast version is like the only one you can play, that's fine. But I think it's one that you should try to track down and play in some form.
Definitely.
Cool.
Cool. So, the last one up. What's your last choice, Dave?
Well, I think I am going to go. So, I'm probably gonna go with SEGA Rally Championship.
Yay! That was one of my choices too.
I was like thinking Clockwork Knight, Virtua Fighter 2. But you mentioned the 3-pack, so you got them covered there. SEGA Rally Championship, you really cannot do better than that, I think, if you're into racing games, or even if you're not into racing games and you're just kind of like, because the control is just sublime. They just, for some reason, they were able to create this game that is incredibly arcadey. At the same time, it just has like these nuanced controls that you can really get. You can be a complete beginner and crashing into walls and still have fun, but you can get really, really good with those controls, and it's just more and more enjoyable the better you get, and the more like half a second that you're shaving off of your course times. And it's just one of those games that I feel like I can come back to over the last 25 years. I've been able to come back to that game and enjoy it and get just as much fun out of it. And my 4-year-old even watches me play, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's the car game," because that's the only car game that I play that he recognizes, and he likes the slight turn maybe, or,
Does he like the game over? Yeah.
Game over, yeah, exactly.
Easy right turn, baby.
Hey, let's look at those course times. Why don't we? Or whatever.
Damn.
Just the music. It's just absolutely dripping with that SEGA, that mid '90s SEGA style, and you got Takenova Mitsuyoshi on doing the music, and I can't say enough about that game. I mean, I don't care about the mesh transparencies on the car windows or anything. I just love Sega Rally. What do you guys think about Sega Rally?
To be honest, I actually never played it.
I am so damned happy that you picked this, so for the listeners, we had been trying to organize this for a couple of weeks, and we have some topics that we wanted to hit on, and wanted to put down what was originally like a top 5 recommended for this before it started kind of getting long, and this was one of my choices, and I'm so damn happy that David picked this out. This is one of those high points in the Saturn library, the US library, and the Japanese library that it's not going to get talked about because everyone knows Daytona USA, or no one is interested in sports and racing games. It's kind of the bastard redheaded stepchild that no one wants to talk about. Pardon the expression, but
oh no, you can talk about whatever the fuck you want on this podcast. I love this.
It is a fantastic game. It's going to get overlooked by most people at game cons or used game stores, retro gaming stores, because it's a sports game. And I almost feel like we should do an episode just on sports games that are actually worthwhile to pick up, because most of them, let's face it, they're crap. Sports games in general are a dime a dozen, but this is a fantastic game. It's a lot of fun, and it's very Japanese culture with how the announcers are working. Ooh, talk a little bit about it already, so you can kind of get that feeling. But it's enjoyable. It doesn't matter how, like a philosophy I've kind of had for a while. It doesn't really matter how bad the graphics are. If the gameplay is there, if the controls are tight and the gameplay is there, it's a classic. Mm-hmm. You can look at any one of these games that haven't really aged well as far as their graphics content are concerned, but you pick it up and they're playable. Right.
I mean, same thing goes for film. You can be watching an old black and white movie, but if it's Casablanca, or if it's like if the story is there, the acting is there, then it's solid. Well. It ages well, and this game just has sublime control. I really can't compare any other Saturn racing game to this game. I mean, other ones get close, and they get the drift mechanic, and they get the the braking and the way that the car's weight shifts and everything like that. But this game just nails it, and it just makes me. I think they kind of messed it up with the Netlink version where they tuned it for the 3D control pad. I don't particularly like that one. I play the original with the Japanese original D-pad, and it's just perfect.
So is the racing games like because I don't really play a lot of racing games. Is it like the arcade games where you like using the wheels the best way to do it, or is the wheel just a gimmick in the racing genre?
I don't think so with the Saturn games. I think the wheel is analog and it does help on certain games, and certain games it's not able to save. I mean, if it's a terrible game like Hang On, the wheel is going to make it slightly more tolerable, but it's not going to make it a good game. Sega Rally is a beautifully programmed game, and it's great on a D-pad, or it's great on the steering wheel. I mean, what do you think, Kay?
So my confession, I own a Saturn steering wheel, like a Mad Catz steering wheel.
Oh yeah, that's a nice one, right?
It's okay. There's one that I wanted that I think was only released in Europe, that a little bit more, that I've never been able to find. But I only ever use that wheel. You guys are gonna laugh. On Die Hard Trilogy.
Oh, Die Hard Trilogy.
What the hell?
Oh, the driving stage. That's so hard without it. Yeah, no, you're right.
It was actually a lot of fun to play Die Hard. I mean, I feel almost like I need to walk the Game of Thrones walk of shame right now with people throwing vegetables at me. Die Hard Trilogy was fun for playing the Die Hard 3 or game where you're driving around
mowing things down.
And it was fun with that wheel. And honestly, that is the only reason I owned that wheel.
Wow.
I love the Sega Rally on the controller.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah, personally, I never really played any of really the racing games because
well, if you play one,
yeah,
this is the one.
Oh no, I definitely do. I need to play that in Daytona, USA. I mean, I know I'm probably gonna get blasted for saying that, but I don't know. I just really never was into racing much. But I'll definitely pick those games up, and I'll let you guys know.
Play the original Daytona USA if you're gonna pick that one up. Was it the Champion Circuit Edition? It added more content, but it just wasn't there. It wasn't as good, I thought.
What about that Japanese release? The one that's like where they kept both the music. It's the one. It's like the only Japanese copy of it.
I have not played that.
Gotcha.
Well, you're into manga and anime, so if you said you mentioned that you were going to get into, and maybe that'll get you
into
excited. The initial D series.
Yeah, I definitely was interested in getting into that.
I guess if you get into that might get you excited for trying your hand at some driving games, but because that really goes into like the technique of driving, and it's not just it's not a really shallow series. Like it gets really into the driving aspect of things. So I think if you do that, and then you might be interested in trying some Sega Rally.
Wasn't there some initial D games on the Saturn as well?
There was, but I can't recommend it.
Shit, they're bad?
I don't think I've played it. Oddly enough, though, I do have an Initial D VCD that I've played on my Saturn, but not the actual game.
I gotcha. Sounds good. I'll definitely have to check those at least those racing games out. I guess we should wrap it up. Thank you guys for listening. Do you guys want to plug anything or have any contact info you want to tell people?
Not really, just that I've been enjoying being a part of the Sega Collectors of America group, and it's a nice little community. Seems like it's growing, and there's excitement there about the console, so it's a good jumping off place to discuss issues, hardware issues, software.
It's facebook.com/groups/SaturnCoA. That's the Sega Saturn Collectors of America.
Cool.
I'm an admin for a couple of Saturn groups. Also, the primary one that I'm involved in was the Trade Sale Collect group. That's facebook.com/groups/Sega Saturn. And I do reproductions of Saturn games that, if people are interested in that sort of thing.
Talk to him, he can hook you up with maybe Police Knots, or maybe he'll flash your Saturn Action Replay. Or maybe he just won't. He'll be like, no.
Let's see if my printer works this month, right?
Yeah, we'll see if we get that working. But cool. Yeah, in terms of myself, I really don't have any Twitter or any contact info. If you guys would like to contact me on Twitter, my Twitter is @LondonBeckett. That's LONDONBECCKETT. Or just my name, London Beckett with 1 T. But yeah, I have a small Twitter. You guys can talk to me on there, ask me questions, and I imagine if the show goes on, we'll actually have our own dedicated Twitter and Facebook that you guys can check out, and we'll plug those. But from the Sega Saturn podcast, thank you guys for listening, and have a good day.